I still remember the exact moment my mother let go of my hand. Not when I was a child, not when I moved out, but on my wedding day. Standing outside the church in my white dress while rain poured down my face, watching their car disappear down the road. They never looked back. Not once. I stood there with roses in my hands, squeezing them so hard the stems snapped, while guests streamed past me with umbrellas and confused faces, while my phone rang over and over with my fiancé's name on the screen. Unable to move, unable to speak, because something inside me had just broken in a way I knew would never fully heal. I had spent 30 years trying to earn my parents' love. That was the day I finally stopped. What I didn't know yet was that a year later, my father would show up at my office, older, broken, asking for help. And that my mother would send a letter that wasn't an apology, but a confession. That finally explained everything. My name is Elena. I was 30 years old when it happened. I know how it sounds, a grown woman still trying to earn her parents' love. But when you grow up invisible, you become addicted to approval. My parents adored my younger brother Mason. Everything in our family revolved around him. His football games, his grades, his problems, his future. I was just there, the reliable daughter, the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble because she knew nobody would come for her anyway. When I got accepted into college, my mother barely smiled. When Mason got suspended for fighting, they hired a private tutor and bought him a car to cheer him up. Still, I kept trying. I helped pay bills when Dad lost his job. I drove Mom to doctor appointments. I skipped vacations to babysit Mason's kids after his divorce. Every single time I thought, maybe now they'll finally see me. They never did. Then, I met Daniel. And for the first time in my life, someone chose me first. I truly believed my wedding day would finally be the day my parents acted like they loved me. I was wrong about that too. But I was right about Daniel. And that made all the difference. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother started acting strange, ignoring my calls, canceling dress fittings, snapping at me over nothing. Then, one night, she finally exploded. "You're selfish," she said coldly. I stared at her. What? This wedding, the timing, everything. Mom, you helped choose the date. That was before Mason lost his job. There it was again. Always Mason. What does that have to do with my wedding? My father sighed dramatically. Your brother is struggling, Elena. We can't focus on parties right now. Parties? I whispered. I'm getting married. My mother folded her arms. Honestly, a courthouse ceremony would have been enough. I looked around the table, suddenly feeling 12 years old again. Invisible, humiliated. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Daniel kissed my forehead and whispered, after we're married, they don't get to hurt you anymore. I wanted to believe him. The morning of the wedding started beautifully. Sunlight through the hotel windows, my bridesmaids laughing, my dress fitting perfectly. For the first time in weeks, I felt happy. Then my father called. Elena, his voice was flat. Your mother and I are running late. How late? Silence. We may not make it. My stomach dropped. What do you mean you may not make it? My wedding starts in 40 minutes. Mason had an emergency. I felt cold all over. Dad, my wedding. He needs us. And I don't? Another silence. Don't make this harder than it already is. The call ended. I stood there staring at my phone while my bridesmaids watched in horror. Daniel arrived and found me crying in the suite. They're not coming, I choked out. His face darkened instantly. I expected him to comfort me. Instead, he became very still. He crouched in front of me and said quietly, "Then let them lose you." I wiped my tears, fixed my makeup, and walked down the aisle alone. Every guest stood when I entered. I heard whispers immediately. Where are her parents? Oh my God. I could feel the humiliation burning through me. Then I saw Daniel at the altar. And when he looked at me, I realized something. I wasn't alone anymore. The truth. 3 days after the wedding, my aunt called me secretly. "Elena," she whispered, "you deserve to know the truth." "Mason never had an emergency." I froze. "He was drunk. Your parents skipped your wedding because Mason got arrested after crashing his motorcycle." I felt physically sick. "It gets worse," she whispered. "Your parents spent the money they promised for your wedding gift paying Mason's legal fees. Thousands of dollars. Money they claimed they couldn't afford." Darkest moment. I sat on my kitchen floor shaking. For 30 years, I had defended them. For 30 years, I told myself they were doing their best. But they had chosen him every single time. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. That night, I blocked their numbers. No dramatic message, no screaming, nothing. I simply disappeared from their lives the same way they had disappeared from mine. Months passed. For the first time in my life, I had peace. Daniel and I moved to another city. I started therapy. I learned what healthy love looked like. And slowly, I stopped waiting for my parents to become different people. Then, almost a year later, my father showed up at my office. I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, older. "Elena," he said quietly. I felt nothing. No warmth, no excitement, just emptiness. "What do you want?" His eyes filled with tears immediately. "We need help." Mason had drained their savings completely. Multiple DUIs, gambling debts, rehab, more arrests. The golden child had finally destroyed everything. Dad admitted they were close to losing their house. Then he said something that made me laugh out loud. "We thought family takes care of each other." Huh. Family. The same word they ignored when they drove away from my wedding. I looked him directly in the eyes. "Did you think about family when Mom drove away from my wedding?" His face crumbled. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine shame. "I made mistakes," he whispered. "No," I said calmly. "You made choices." He started crying. But I didn't comfort him. Because nobody comforted me while I stood outside that church, abandoned, in the rain. As my father prepared to leave, he handed me a small envelope. "Your mother wanted you to have this." Inside, a letter. Not an apology. A confession. My hand shook while reading it. My mother admitted she had always resented me. Because I reminded her of the years she felt trapped and unhappy. I was born during a time when their marriage was collapsing. And somewhere deep inside herself, she had blamed me for it. None of it was my fault. But she punished me for it anyway. For 30 years. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but abandoning you on your wedding day was the moment I realized what kind of mother I had become. And I think losing you is the punishment I earned. I stared at that sentence for a very long time. Then I folded the letter carefully, put it away. Not because I forgave her, but because I was finally free.
A month later, my parents lost the house. Mason disappeared after stealing money from them again. And suddenly, the daughter they had ignored for decades became the one person they desperately wanted back. Too late. People think revenge is screaming or humiliation, making someone suffer. But sometimes the most painful revenge is simply moving on peacefully without them. Today, I'm 34. I have a husband who loves me, a little daughter who will never once question whether she matters, and a life built completely without my parents in it. Sometimes I still think about that rainy afternoon outside the church, about watching their car disappear while I stood there broken in my wedding dress. Back then, it felt like the worst moment of my life. But honestly, it was the moment my real life finally began.